Hi, this is Clay Warren, Head of Digital CX at Qualtrics, and I want to welcome you to a webcast series we're calling the Digital Playbook. In this series, we'll discuss all things digital, digital marketing, digital analytics, digital strategy, and digital customer experience. Throughout this series, we'll invite industry experts and digital practitioners to discuss and debate these topics. Today, we've invited Adobe's Chief Creative Director, Steve Gustafson, to join us. We've invited Steve on today's webcast as he has just finished what was an incredible transition of moving the Adobe Summit from a 20,000 in-person event in Las Vegas to a virtual conference. And most importantly, Adobe did this very successfully, I might add. If you're not familiar with the Adobe Summit, it is one of the biggest digital marketing summits in the world. Welcome, Steve. Good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Clay. Thanks for having me.
If you don't mind, tell us a little bit more about your background, your role at Adobe, and your responsibilities.
Yeah, so I'm Chief Creative Director. There's two of us. Adobe has two businesses, and I basically lead the internal creative team for our digital experience business. That means that I manage the teams of creative directors and art directors, copywriters, user experience designers, account managers, traffic people, video production, basically anyone that you would think of at an agency that does creative work. We basically have that sort of function internally. And then of course, I also oversee a lot of our agency relationships and the expression of the Adobe brand. You know, we work with dozens, if not hundreds of agencies sort of around the globe on everything from advertising to the experience we build on adobe.com to, you know, digital demand content and live events, which is where we're going to talk. And I've been at Adobe for about 15 years next month, if you can believe it. I can't. I joined through a company called Omniture, which is a web analytics company that was based out of Orem, Utah at the time. I joined there pretty soon out of college as a graphic designer of all things. And I just sort of slowly, you know, chipped away and you know, had lots of great experiences, credible experience for, you know, Omniture, a small Utah-based company being acquired by Adobe. And I've just been really fortunate to be part of a really great company and work on a great brand and be surrounded by really incredible people that I've had the chance to learn from. So that's sort of a little bit about me in a nutshell. And now I sort of lead the creative team for one of these businesses.
That's awesome. Thanks for the intro. So you have a pretty significant role in Adobe Summit. And having worked at Adobe before, I know you're all about creating awesome experiences for customers. So generally this happens in person. And so I'd love to just better understand kind of what your mindset as all of a sudden we go into this global pandemic and Adobe Summit is canceled from Las Vegas. And having attended Adobe Summit, it's an incredible event, probably more than 20,000 people in Vegas. So how did you guys start thinking about this transition to moving from this in-person engaging event to a more digital format?
Yeah, so it was you know, we all say we're living in unprecedented times. I'm getting very sick of hearing that phrase, but it still remains to be very true. You know, we're learning new things about how we need to operate on a daily basis. We're, you know, challenging ourselves and we're learning new things a lot. And as it relates to a summit, you know, it particularly poignant for me. I've worked on that event for 15 years. Like there are a few people in tech who've worked on a single, you know, conference brand for that long. So this would have been my 15th physical event. So we had it all planned, of course, just like everyone else did. I know you guys also had an incredible event planned. As did SAP and a bunch of our, you know, peers in the industry. There's a lot of us who sort of went through this at the same time. But it happened really rapidly, right? We had a complete event that was planned, the identity, the experience, the keynotes, and I'll speak sort of broadly on behalf of a number of people.
Sure.
So I don't think this is as I personally did all of this. It takes a village. But we had our keynote team that was planning to have an incredible lineup of speakers, right? We had all sorts of celebrities and you know, artists and entertainment, plus of course, hundreds and hundreds of tracks of people. So, you know, as sort of the pandemic hit, of course, things were changing almost on like a daily basis. We were trying to process new information. And it frankly pivoted very quickly from we're going to do this event to, oh, shoot, like this is real and we need to be very sensitive about it. And Adobe has a very, I think, a very, you know, pure and ethical sort of culture to it.
Right.
And so as our leadership, again, I didn't make the decision to cancel the physical event, but I certainly was in the room and you know, heard the stuff firsthand. And, you know, our leaders realized Adobe is not the company that wants to be, you know, hosting an event that puts people at risk, both employees or, of course, our customers that we care deeply
Sure.
about. And so there was a very sort of poignant moment where some of our leaders came in and said, by the way, it was a meeting where we were actually like talking about the keynote, actually going through real stuff that we were doing.
Wow.
And the sentiment was, they walked in the room and said, we've made some decisions and we need to do the right things by our customers and by all of you. And so we're going to have to postpone or cancel the physical event. I know you guys postponed it.
Yep.
Who knows what's happening, right? This continues to evolve. But for us, it was very clear. We were 4 weeks out. We weren't going to put ourselves in harm's way. We needed to make decisions and be very sort of intentional about what we did, because it was a massive physical thing requiring travel for global people. We wanted to make sure we were ahead of it. So we made the call, and then very quickly we realized, well, we've got to still do something that has great value. And so what does that look like? And so we actually went through a couple different phases of it, where it went from the incredible physical thing that everyone's experienced. And I've been, by the way, to X4 in the past too. So like, there's a lot of us who've done this really well. So we can't do that. So then, well, let's still record it and stream it live, but not to, a physical audience. And of course, moments or days or hours, later we realized even that's not realistic. The shelter in place hit in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
The best of intentions. And we had this incredible production plan with our keynote team, using all the creative from my team. They had this insane setup that they would have actually recorded in one of our offices, and it would have been amazing. And we would have streamed it live, and it would have felt, I think, an incredibly strong proxy for what a normal viewer of Summit would have seen. So if you weren't physically attending, but you watched someone online, this would have basically mimicked that. So we're like, well, we can do this. It'll be great. And that keynote team is of course, we think they're quite great. I think they're one of the best in the business, but they do these insane keynote productions. But then very quickly we realized we can't even do that. So if you're, sheltered in place, and of course I'm in Utah, a lot of my counterparts are in San Francisco or San Jose.
Right.
We're dealing with this patchwork of guidance from different states and local, governing bodies, so that we couldn't even like have a shared point of view at that point of what needed to happen. So we realized, well, shoot, like our customers are planning on it. People need this moment. That was another thing we felt very strongly about, that our customers now, like the world is changing around us rapidly, but we still want to connect. I'm an introvert. Maybe I like to connect physically less than others, but people still wanted that moment where they could maybe it was their morning coffee. They wanted to sit down and experience something. We're all still in the business of building great customer experiences. And so we realized, well, we got to do something. We don't want to postpone it. We don't want to, it's too late at this point to do it effectively. So we realized, well, we've got to go purely digital. Self-recording video at home. My video crew did a lot of post-production on it, but we're like, we're going to do it, and we're going to lean into it. And one of our values is being genuine and authentic. And so we're like, look, let's not try to make it what it is and put people over goofy green screens. You could probably do that really well, but we chose not to. And we said, well, we're just going to pivot. And we realized, looking back, that we made that decision literally 2 weeks before we launched the experience that we did. Wow. And so, of course, this is tons of teams, right? We're working with our web product management team, engineers, content creators, the people actually doing all the content. Of course, we had hundreds of people lined up to do sessions, product marketers and other, partners and customers and experts.
Right.
So we realized we really pivoted. Within 2 weeks, we said, okay, this is going to be a purely digital experience with purely pre-recorded content. And let's just build and design the best experience. So of course, my team ended up playing probably an oversized role in this, because working with our sort of web product management team, we had to design the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's just videos on a site. So how do you build an experience that felt somewhat personal, but then we could also give some hierarchy to what were those main stage moments? Right. We even shot a film with Tom Brady, by the way, in his home. It was the very last thing we shot in Tribeca, New York.
Right. So
it's high. If you look at the experience, you're like, that's high productions, because we had an actual film there. But a lot of it became physically impossible to do that. And so, it was an interesting moment, right? We built best practice guides, and we sent, recording equipment that was becoming harder and harder to find to people's homes, so that they could actually film themselves in the best sort of setup with, passable audio, so we could actually hear them. But it was very raw and very genuine. And the good news was we actually got some really tremendous feedback from the community around it. Yeah. And of course, we're Adobe, right? So our quality bar is like the most obscene thing ever. But in this moment, it's the CEO in his living room, right? And it's the head of the business unit, sitting on the computer in his home office. And we had just overwhelmingly positive feedback from people saying, oh my gosh, you guys actually pulled it off. Who cares what it looks like?
Yeah. I agree. I mean, having watched a lot of it, I thought you guys did an incredible job, and hence why we're speaking today. But
Yeah.
you recreated a lot of that summit experience that I've had in the past, which was incredible. I watched one session and I was thinking, how did they pull this off? I mean, you mentioned best practice guides, and you don't have to dive into that, but did you send those out to speakers beforehand and say, here's best practices to make sure how to present to an audience digitally? You mentioned sending recording equipment. Talk about that a little bit, where I can imagine, because I saw on Twitter a lot of your speakers, who I know personally were like, yeah, I get to go and sit at home and present in my pajamas. And
Yeah, right.
actually it came across so professional and well done. So talk a little bit about kind of some of the best practices and such.
Yeah, and by the way, after that, I'll share sort of a summary of this. We're also producing some content, a couple blogs that have gone live, and then we're actually about to launch a full-blown, in-depth, digital event best practice guide that we'll be making available.
Yep.
So some of that material is coming. We certainly, maybe you can link to that in however this is promoted. But there's some really great stuff where we've documented it. But the first thing we mostly did is say, look, we've got to send you some basic stuff, right? Of course, in Utah, we had the benefit, I think, of sort of observing what was happening on the coasts. So as we saw things getting tighter and tighter, of course, New York was particularly, hit by this. But the minute California shut down, I think a lot of us in Utah are like, this is coming.
Right.
And we have a couple days to prepare. And so I remember the moment of when we said we're going to close our California offices. I'm like, I know where this is going, right? Stuff starts on the coast, it works its way inward. Utah is always, health-wise or even fashion-wise, for any fashion nerds, things start on the coast and work their way towards, the center of the company or the country. And I realized, I'm going to take my stuff home. I'm going to grab my monitor and I've got a fairly nice home office setup, because I just packed up everything that I had and went home. But as we realized, there's a lot of people who don't do what I do for a living, where they live and breathe on these, big monitors with sound systems. They didn't even have cameras.
Right.
There's some fundamental things, a lot of people just went home with their laptops, and then these orders came down. They weren't allowed back in to grab their stuff. And so we realized, well, shoot, there's a fundamental amount of stuff that people have to have just to make sure that the audio and video can be recorded in some cases. And so I think, our video production team and our keynote team sort of collaborated on this. And they just figured out what is the basic set of assets that you need. You need a webcam. You need to make sure you've got semi-decent audio. A lot of them weren't mics. You'll notice a lot of these recordings, it's just people sitting up, up in your grill on their laptops doing what they can. But I think a self-recording camera was table stakes. We wanted to be able to capture the person. I think that's part of how we made it feel more real. They had slides, and of course, some people have elaborate decks, and other people have very sort of functional PowerPoint slides that were based on a template, which is totally fine. We don't expect a data scientist to be an incredible designer. So I think being a little genuine there is fine. But we wanted to make sure that we could see as many of them as possible. And so I think you see this, maybe not in all the breakouts. I think a lot of those were recorded in sort of a very scrappy and authentic way. If you're, we know some of these guys, right? Like a Ben Gaines, who's a very prolific, Twitterer, talking about analytics, product management, for example.
Right.
He had his deck, but he maybe wasn't on camera. But we did produce quite a few of what we tried to make feel like our keynotes. So we had, our CEO Shantanu shot in his living room, right? There was a crew, to give him a little love, but he set it up himself, right? We didn't put people in people's homes.
Right.
We did not violate the law in any of these cases. So these people set it up. But then we also had innovation keynotes. And from everyone from Steve Hammond, who's pretty well known, who hosts our Adobe Sneaks, which is sort of the labs people showing sort of cool innovations. He's a bit of a photography aficionado himself. And so he shot himself with a multi-camera setup in his basement with proper lighting.
Wow.
So there was sort of a gamut of people like Steve who have some skill and love to do this stuff, to others where we're like, look, you're going to be one of what we would have called an innovation keynote. We want to see you. You've got to be on screen. We want our executives and sort of these big stories to be told. So we ended up sending them cameras in the case of a lot of those people, and then some basic audio stuff, but it was still pretty scrappy, as you saw.
Yeah. It's interesting because I felt more connected from an experience perspective of those who were on camera.
Yeah.
I could see them face to face versus we always think talking slides never quite connects. Did you guys see any of those trends on I don't know if you guys measured any of the experiences. I mean, generally, I know summit sessions are measured in some way, shape, or form based on customer feedback. Did you guys get any customer feedback on any of that?
I mostly it was anecdotal, just to say that, hey, we're super impressed you guys pulled this
Mm,
thing off, because a lot of people just flat out cancel things because they're like, we don't know how to pull it off in
right.
a matter of weeks that we had. So I mean, the experience was pretty bare bones. I would say we didn't look at it from a, did we get better engagement with or with camera speakers? I think it was more anecdotal, like what did people respond to?
Mm,
But we did look at it from so that's almost more of like some subjective data, which frankly we didn't have time to do a lot of that. But we did have an analytics team that did an incredible assessment, sort of like daily recaps to the leadership team to say, these are the trends that we're seeing. And of course, as you can imagine, there's a massive spike on the day of, because we told people like show up for these, couple of hours and block it out. And then of course it drops off quickly. And then there's a long tail of engagement where, we've got to actively market it to get people to come back to it. So that was sort of obvious. But what I really asked that analytics team to look into and share back with my team responsible for the user experience was, what did people click through? Like, because it was a fully digital experience, we should have complete, Adobe Analytics data on what people actually were doing.
Right.
And so it revealed some very particular trends. If you spend any time in the UX world, you know that carousels, it's not rocket science. The thing in the first position gets the most engagement. The thing in the last gets the least. And even with Tom Brady in that 5th spot, even he couldn't quite, crack into what is, just human behavior and how people use some of those things. So, we were very intentional at first to try to make the design of the experience feel like the same hierarchy that you would experience at the event.
Right.
Executive keynotes up top, vice president level sort of innovation keynotes below there, news and announcements in a pod below that. And then of course we had sort of teaser to breakouts. And then we had I think we produced 177 total pages, by the way, in 2 weeks with an accompanying video, which that's a whole other thing. We had our engineering team who did a script that allowed us to basically populate an Excel spreadsheet with all of the data, metadata, session descriptions, speaker titles on all of that.
Wow.
We have a sort of a proprietary video player where we upload the videos, but then they use basically an Excel spreadsheet and a script to basically produce all those pages. So otherwise a publisher would have had to physically clone and copy, in Experience Manager, of course we use our own tech, but they would have had to make those all one by one. So they basically extrapolated that entire process and automated a ton of it. And then we were able to go back through and sort of, refine and make sure the video playback worked, to make sure the copy was, succinct. So there was sort of a pretty big hierarchy. And some of the trends we saw afterwards was what I was mentioning. If it's the first thing on the top of the page in the first position, it gets a tremendous amount of engagement.
Sure. Yep.
It was Shantanu, our CEO. A lot of people watched the video. So that, that's great data to share with your CEO that, hey, by the way, people loved your content the best.
Right.
We also designed it that way.
Yeah.
And so as we think about future events, we're looking at the data to say, well, how do the breakout sessions behave?
Right.
Because we know that while we love the keynotes, the way that a practitioner who's an analyst or a developer or a content strategist, whatever you might be, the way that they justify to their management actually going to these events is because of that breakout content. I mean, it was probably not as much as we would have, but I think we still ended up launching 100 to 120 sessions that were all recorded again within 2 weeks in people's home. We had some vendors who supported us in some of the recording, but that stuff was done really, really rapidly and very authentically. And so what we're looking at now is how do those breakouts actually get viewed? And as we think about our own marketing and segmentation and what our own sort of campaigns look like, how do we make sure that the breakouts are getting the long tail value? Because again, some topics are more niche than others.
Sure.
We've got a deep, history with analytics, and so our data and insights, we still called it a track. So we had an innovation keynote led by some people that used to work closely with, and then that had the most breakout sessions. But there were some others like advertising that are more niche.
Right.
And so we had to be very thoughtful looking at the data to say, look, just because one breakout session got more views than the other doesn't mean it's necessarily inherently more valuable.
Right.
And so we then went back and said, well, let's look at the raw data and understand like what sessions got engaged or, people engaged with. And then let's go back. And this thing I always push on people, data in a silo, like don't just show me a chart. If I can't look at the experience, you're only telling me half the story.
Sure.
So we started then to go back and map it and say, well, let's look at that breakout session. Where did it sit? Was it on a breakout, keynotes page with 73 other pieces of content? Or is it one of the 3 things on the page?
Right.
where did the promotion of that page sit on the overview page? If it was in a carousel, was it in the first place or the fourth or the seventh?
Yep.
And a lot of this is just very obvious. We tried to predict the best as we could with our audiences and what content they want to look at. But we're also being very thoughtful to say, just because the thing only got 50 views doesn't mean it wasn't a valuable piece of content.
Yeah.
So we're trying to balance those things. Again, this is why we care deeply about experience. It's not just what the data is telling us.
Right.
You have to look at the experience and the data,
Context.
and think creatively, and context matters. I have to remind people context matters. So in our analysts they're brilliant analysts, use their own tools, but I would say, unless you can show me the picture that is associated with the data, I don't think I'm getting the full story. It's not going to help me make a smarter decision.
I love that. We often talk about context to any piece of feedback that we get from customers, data we look at. Context is so critical, because without context, it really leaves meaning out of the data. So I love that. So that's great insight. I would love to just get your thoughts on, okay, so we're going to move forward. Let's assume in 3 months, maybe longer, this pandemic ends, and all of a sudden we're back in, when is NRF? I think NRF is the beginning of next year, something like that.
Usually January, right?
January, we have Salesforce, Dreamforce. We have all these conferences that are going to come up again in 2020. What is your point of view on, are we going to see more of these events transition to a digital format? I mean, you guys were incredibly successful doing this. I can't imagine, well, maybe you will, but NRF transitions to a digital event. But I would love your perspective on what you see moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and
Sure.
I can't speak to Adobe's,
Right.
private strategy. I'm not even totally privy to all of those details, but I think even if you just observe what's happening in the marketplace, and especially in sort of the tech realm, Dreamforce is canceled, right? That was supposed to be in November. That was that's arguably the biggest tech conference there is. They bring in boats to house humans. Like that's not going to happen, right? Cruise ships are not a place people want to actively dock for an event. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Sure. And then you've got brands like Facebook and Microsoft and others, incredible brands, of course, partners of Adobe, so we love them. And they're basically saying, we're not touching a live event until middle of next year.
Wow.
So Adobe, we haven't made any statement about that. But some of these brands Microsoft said, we're not doing a physical event until June of 2021 at least.
Wow. Yeah,
so, and Facebook's developer conference, I actually just downloaded their app. I'm not a developer, but Apple's just the other day launched something.
Yep.
I'm just an Apple fanboy. And so I love watching their stuff, and, Adobe's brand and voice is very different than Apple's, but I like to watch what's happening in the industry. And so their, WWDC was canceled as a physical event, but they're doing it through an app. And so I downloaded the app because, of course, I love to have these apps and know what other brands are doing. So that as we sort of evolve our own app strategy, which we're toying with right now, we know what people are doing. But they're saying it's going to be all in the app, and all of the marketing, all of the content will be updated through this, single application.
Wow.
Which for developers makes a ton of sense. But we work with developers and marketers, and so we should be doing something sort of equally interesting. So I can tell you that Summit was a moment in time, and I think we were very successful, almost from the human side of it. The fact that we could pivot an entire organization at home, and Adobe had been very much like an in-the-office culture before.
Sure.
I went to the office every day from 9 to 6, for 15 years. I'm old school. That's how I operated. The kids these days wanted to be a little more remote. I didn't get it before, and now I certainly get it. And I think, people much more senior than me are certainly, have their eyes open. So we did a very impressive feat from that standpoint, but we have other events coming up. We're doing a digital government event on May 21st. We're soon to announce another sort of combined, midsummer event that we're going to do that's going to cross a couple of our segments. And we're innovating each time we do an event. And of course, then we have Adobe Max down the road, and we're figuring out what's that experience going to look like.
Yeah.
And so we're innovating from what was the foundation from Summit, from a personalization and AI recommended. I didn't even talk about that, but we have some of our own Sensei technology, driving recommendations around sessions across adobe.com. And the robots are telling us a lot of interesting things about how people, consume our content. But if we had had time, again, literally 2 weeks, we would have done more actual live streaming, or some sort of interactivity and Q&A and chat. And so we've got this digital gov event where we're working with a third party, and we're going to do more of that and sort of test some of these features. By the summer, and again, this is all for our digital experience business, we're going to be adding more and more sort of interactivity and functionality. And I think by the end of the year, Adobe, if anyone can do it, I hope it's us. I think we're going to be doing some really incredible stuff that looks like Summit, but has live interactive stuff. I think we heard any feedback. It was, what you guys did was incredible. The only thing we missed is if there had been a truly live stream thing from someone's home. Right. It was a very minor nit. We said, that sounds lovely. We would have loved to have done that too. Yeah. So I think we're going to get really, really good at this ourselves. And given what we've been able to accomplish here, I can't imagine that even, think about Adobe Summit next year or Adobe Max 2021, or I'm sure a lot of our industry peers, Microsoft has multiple conferences, right? Ignite,
right.
Inflame, whatever all these conference names are. I would have to imagine that even if when we get back to doing physical things, and I think, again, knowing face masks and social distancing are a thing, I can't imagine a lot of people are jumping and chomping at the bit to get back into a room 6 feet from someone. Whether that's for work or a conference or a church, I just can't imagine people are going to want to do that, in the next 3 months at least. So I suspect that even when we do that, and we will, right, we will recover from this and want to physically be together again at some point in the future. So regardless of what that looks like, I can imagine that every single company is going to have an incredible physical event that may be smaller or constructed differently. Again, we haven't restated what that would look like for us, but we'll do that. But I'm guessing that the digital online portion is going to be table stakes going forward.
Sure.
And not what we just did. I think that was what we could, humans could actually pull off in 2 weeks. But I think where we land by the end of the year with, I can only imagine, if you're in the conferencing tech biz and the live streaming biz, that those are going to be hot companies that are probably mostly startups and fledgling, and they haven't had to have the, the heavy integration conversations with an Adobe or a Qualtrics or an SAP. Sure. Companies that have CMS technologies and analytics technologies. Like, there's going to be a golden age of those conference technologies saying, see, we've been telling you, like, live streaming is going to be a thing. We're going to care about it. And so I can imagine that, having an incredible digital first, online, interactive, live video, multiple people coming together, whatever the chat technology sort of rise to the top. And again, there's hundreds of these vendors. Well, it'd be interesting to see, the MarTech next sort of stack of the next, 8,000, video. I'm sure there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of. Yeah.
I can imagine there's a new virtual events category now and you mentioned it, like the interaction that we can have digitally, we can still create that. You guys, Adobe's one of the leaders in doing that. So super impressive, Steve. I agree. I think there's a whole new category that's going to be created out of this. I think this idea of, one, you can extend your reach as well massively through digital channels. And you said something that was really keen for me to repeat for our audiences, having a digital first mindset of how do you create this event as almost digitizing your in-person event while still even perhaps having an in-person event to complement it. So,
I think you could do both. And, we're Adobe, right? So we've been talking about changing the world through digital experiences as long as I've been at Adobe, which is a decade now. So it's clearly in our DNA to do that. I think we of course make great tools, and we've got great partners, in the spaces we don't make, particular software. But events, we're so good at it. We just continue to do it. And I think that's the balance people are going to have to strike is you've got to go digital first. It is literally everyone's reality now. Even as we settle back into something new, it's going to be a new normal. You've got more and more people at home. I think people and travel budgets are going to change. Certain industries are being there's complete upheaval in the travel and hospitality space right now. Yeah. We feel for our, customers who are in that space. And of course we're trying to help them, but there's others that are going to flourish as part of this. And I think we've got to get really comfortable with the idea that travel budgets might be thin, and people might be like, well, wait a minute, I attended Summit last year and I got great value out of it. We had I don't have the latest stat, but we looked at the amount of hours of video consumption that people had done, and it was in like the years.
Wow.
We got to the point where the only way to tally it was to say 4.5 years of content has been consumed in the first 2 weeks of this thing.
That's crazy.
Don't quote me on the number, but it was literally in the years,
crazy.
And every day it sort of crept up. So clearly there's an appetite. The thing I think that I want to be cautious about is sort of the saturation.
Sure.
This is true of anything, right? Like, we moved away from direct mail because people were sick of getting, mail in their inboxes. Then we overwhelmed people with emails, and now, we're sort of embracing sort of multi-touch things. So I think that's how we're all going to have to calibrate is digital is table stakes. You know that you're going to log into X4, and I don't know what you guys do this year, but by 2021, you'll log into X4 for an incredible experience with
Yep.
Michelle Obama or whoever you guys had this year. You had an insane lineup.
Right.
And, that's going to be a thing that everyone's going to do. So how do you complement it with in person? What is the promotional strategy around it? How much of it is like a purely digital thing? How and where are people comfortable like receiving packages in the mail? Like these are all things that I think we're having to consider right now. We thought about, let's give someone a virtual party. Like if you can't watch it in Las Vegas, we want you to have an awesome thing and know that you're an account or a customer that we deeply value. But we ended up exploring and pausing, wanting to be considerate to say, when are people comfortable getting a package in the mail? And I think things are stabilizing a little bit now.
Yep.
I'm not an
epidemiologist.
I'm not that, but I think as sort of the restrictions are loosened, I think we will start to experiment a little bit.
Yeah.
When we did Summit, that was like right at the heart of this, so we weren't going to do that type of a thing. But I think that's the balance: is how do you still gather together in the appropriate ways and in the appropriate amounts, and how much is together with brands versus a company doing it on their own, but in a virtual thing.
Right.
But I think this is it. Like even this connection you and I are having right now. This is what I do all day. I was doing this because I'm in Utah working for a Bay Area tech company. I did this for 6 or 7 hours a day anyways.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's the new normal. And so
it's the new normal.
It's that mix, right? How do you not saturate the market with every single person hosting, their own event? And so we need to be thoughtful about it, as does everyone else. But you can't do this every month because you'll burn people out. Once a year is not enough. We have businesses we need to drive. We need to be, connecting with one another. So we're trying to think through what's the right cadence to be building an experience to engage our customers and our partners.
Right.
And it probably feels quarterly today, but again, the world's changing so much. I think we're still sort of in a trial and error sort of mindset.
Yeah, it is the new normal. I don't see this ending anytime soon. I feel like digital events is going to be the new normal for a lot of brands. And Steve, what I appreciate most is you've definitely laid out the playbook, at the highest level and even into some of the details. So I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, of course.
I appreciate all the insight you provided. We love Adobe over here at Qualtrics, good partners of ours. And so, and for our viewers, if you want to talk about anything you heard on the webcast today, or about how Qualtrics can help your business or Adobe, please feel free to email me at claywarren@qualtrics.com. Or otherwise, you can check out our website at qualtrics.com. Steve, thanks so much again, and be well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Clay. You too.
Yeah.